A really long time ago, I made a video about how I thought libertarians were kind of stupid and compared them to communists. That video hasn't aged great only because my arguments weren't great. However, I'm more convinced of that sentiment now than I ever have been. And the reason why libertarianism is stupid isn't because it's a system that doesn't produce a positive result, because if said system worked or was in any way implementable, the ideals of libertarianism, what libertarianism is designed to try to achieve, is a laudable thing. The thing is, it's impossible. And that's arguably the same as communism, besides the fact that because communism is built on the same thing all leftist principles is built on, which is violent sadism. This is part of the reason why it's killed 150 million people. But libertarianism, arguably, hasn't killed anybody. So why is it bad? It's bad because it doesn't work. It's based on ideas that can't work, and especially the more anarcho-capitalist type styles of libertarianism don't work. And also the non-aggression principle is nonsense. So I could probably go on and on about this, and depending on how many people this video pisses off, maybe I'll make another one. But let's go into just a couple of things of why libertarianism can't work. The chief one, and one I could probably do an entire video about, is the free market doesn't exist and probably can't. Ultimately, competition leads to a dominant force, and that dominant force, anarcho-capitalists would say the dominant force in the market, the monopoly can't stand under libertarianism because there will always be competition. But if that dominant force always buys its competition and prevents the competition by buying them out, then the dominant force can't go away. And especially under anarcho-capitalism, the idea that there's any kind of law way, any kind of legal way to prevent that, goes directly against everything libertarianism is designed for, which is the elimination of government in the complete unchaining of free trade. Because I've talked to libertarians at length, particularly about law enforcement in terms of providing for public safety, and they just say, well, just private companies can do that. Well, what if, and this has happened many, many times in territorial times of America, what if the only person who's providing any kind of law is only beholden to one person, or only beholden to themselves? And that force inevitably stops providing a fair service, because everyone's just like, well, they'll just stop paying for that service. Well, they can just start taking from you. Particularly, you ever heard of a protection racket, which is pay for our protection or else you'll wish you had protection from us. That's inevitable. That's completely inevitable. And once that force becomes the gang that controls the region, well, you just, what you think that a upspring of gang competition is going to occur to compete for the role of who's the best gang for the town? You see how this doesn't work? But what's even worse is markets. A lot of people think America is a free market, and it's not, and it hasn't really ever truly been, but it has never been less of a free market than it is now. Because ultimately the way the American economy works is based on investment and debt. Okay, now we could go on and have in some previous videos talked about debt and the way that shit works, and how it's part of why the economy is ridiculous and doesn't make any sense, because money is just worth whatever people thinks it's worth and whatever certain people with some authority say it's worth. But ultimately you can only play that game for so long before debt begins to pile up and the money begins to depreciate. I don't know if you guys have seen anything about the news right now, but you can't just print more money. No matter what Alan Greenblatt says, you can't just keep printing more money in order to cover debt, because eventually you devalue your currency. But when it comes to market competition, brands, if you know anything about anything, aren't companies. And soon you'll learn that, say, pretty much everything under your sink is owned by two companies, either S.C. Johnson or Procter & Gamble, and probably nobody else. I believe there's like one more fairly competitive organization in the soap industry. But other than that, like the Palmolive guys, who might be actually owned by Procter and Gamble now, I haven't checked. Um, the same two companies own everything that's in your bathroom cabinet and under your sink. Okay, the same 3 or 4 companies make all the drugs. You've noticed things like that, right? But when you realize that regardless of what company there's always an umbrella over that and then an umbrella over that. For instance, a lot of things are owned by Google, and then Google's owned by Alphabet, and Alphabet's owned by who? A lot I believe Twitter is also, and Microsoft are owned by parent companies, and Microsoft owns almost everything under the sun. Even Disney has a parent company. But no matter how far back you go, ultimately you're going to hit a dead end of who do you trace back to. It's always the umbrella company and then one other thing. And at the very, very top of whatever umbrella company owns all the other umbrellas, they're still got one more thing behind them. The same thing that is individually behind every daughter company down the line. No matter where you look, there's always one wall, and it's called the shareholders. And the shareholders make all the decisions. And if you look up in America, there's 2 companies that are the largest shareholder in the overwhelming majority of any company in any field you're ever going to find. Vanguard and BlackRock. And nobody knows who the fuck Vanguard is. No, their shit is private. You can't look up who's in the company Vanguard, but they own everything. And if you go, well, we can actually look up who's in BlackRock, guess who the largest shareholder is in BlackRock? Vanguard. So is it really a conspiracy theory to say that the same handful of people own everything, when even as far as you can look on paper, the same 7 or so companies own literally everything? But when you even look at, well, who owns these companies, you get down to about 2 companies, and then you get down to one of them, and nobody knows who the fuck the staff of that company is. And their holdings are not just in America, they're global. They have a significant stake in China, in Europe, and everywhere else. So if you're ever finding yourself wondering why the fuck corporations always say the same thing and news media or companies always toe the line, and everybody always seems to be saying the exact same thing, what you're looking at is not public consensus. You're looking at what these people have been told to say, and obviously they're all getting told to say the exact same thing. Many of you remember the Trump-Russia possible collusion meme, the Trump-Russia possible collusion meme that came out shortly after, well, actually it was during the 2016 elections. And everyone was wondering why all these news companies were saying the same thing. It's because they were all owned by Clear Channel. Clear Channel owns just about everything that goes over a radio wave in America. And whoever they don't own, I think, is owned by Viacom. And I haven't looked into that too much, but if somebody told me, oh, by the way, Viacom owns Clear Channel or vice versa, I wouldn't be surprised. Part of the severe stagnation that you see in America is due to there is no competition. If everyone's asking, why does this blank cost so much, whether it's university, whether it's a certain kind of electronic component or anything, it's because there's no competition. Once there's no competition, the companies can all get together and say, what do you think is the maximal amount you could possibly bleed out of the consumer public before they'll stop buying this product entirely? And then they all set their shit at that price and don't compete. And if you're ever wondering, well, if any of these corporations start to develop a political or a societal ideology, what's to stop that from spreading to everything they own? And the question is, nothing does, and that's what happens. If you're ever wondering why degenerate, far leftist, and extremist ideology that is abusive to children and harmful to all sorts of people and popularize some of the most grotesque things, if you're ever wondering why that goes without a hitch everywhere, it's because the same handful of people are getting together at some dinner somewhere in Switzerland or at some seminar or at some shit. And it's not all Bohemian Grove. It's not all weird fucking esoteric witchcraft looking bullshit like Alex Jones is concerned with, although, Bohemian Grove is real. And the Skull and Bones Society is real, and the Freemasonry organization is real, and the shit that they do and believe in is fucking weird and no different or harmful or kind of eerie and scary and potentially murderous as Scientology is. Oftentimes these dudes are just meeting at a spa or at a fucking luncheon somewhere or just some seminar where they get together and they talk, they set the agenda, and the agenda is put out there. And you don't have to bring any satanistic or fucking magical or whatever the fuck. You don't have to say whether or not these people for sure worship Moloch or some other fucking weird antediluvian deity or something from beyond the fucking 1,000-year veil of paganism. It doesn't matter. And you'll also notice that a lot of these people, as I've gone on at length, are of this exact same ethnicity and share citizenry with the nation of Israel, as well as whatever nation they actually live in. But even if you don't care or are disinterested in or are turned off by the racial component, as I brought it up at length, it doesn't matter, because the fact remains the same that a like-minded, culturally homogenous group of people that are hostile to the consumer public that they supposedly serve under the capitalism model are doing everything that's wrong in the world. If you want to know why you look outside and it looks like Weimar Germany just prior to the advent of Nazism, that's because it is that way, and for the exact same reasons that you're basically looking at nations that aren't actually sovereign, not whether they're a democracy or not. It doesn't matter, because the elections are suspect to begin with, as even if you don't believe there was any voter fraud in any particular election recently in any particular nation, it doesn't matter, because the candidates as they exist depend on one thing first. Before polling, before voting, they depend on funding and donations. And the reason why they're all largely the same and nothing ever changes, and that when you look at politics as at the face value level as you see it on TV and everything, you're seeing the same people saying the same things and fighting over these same wedge issues that don't really change much. I mean, which isn't to say that wedge issues, whether they're racial justice or abortion or whatever, or the border or immigration, isn't important. But the reason why we always talk about things is so you never ask any questions that matter. Like, what's going on with Social Security? How come none of you have used that word in front of a television camera in 20 years? Is that bubble about to burst? How are you guys going to rein in the stock market so that we don't have 2008? Oh, I didn't even ask that question fast enough before the next 2008 bust happened. Before you start asking questions about money, don't ask about the budget. Don't ask about, and if you do, only talk about the debt ceiling or any of these other words that nobody ever really understands, but a bunch of talking heads on TV insist upon you is important. Don't ask about wartime spending. Don't ask about foreign aid. Don't ask about geopolitics and why Obama went overnight into fucking Iran with a pallet of cash because he couldn't seem to negotiate a nuclear deal. Like, don't ask any of those kind of questions. Don't ask about oil futures. Don't ask about energy fucking futures. Don't ask about how we gamble money on that shit. And don't ask about what that had to do with the 2008 financial crisis or Enron. Don't ask about how Enron happened. Don't ask, hey, is there another Bernie Madoff out there here doing a Ponzi scheme, or are they just doing a better job of hiding it? Don't ask any questions about money. Don't ask any questions about why countries go to war. Just listen for the news media to tell which one of you is literally the Nazis and which one of them is literally the Jews, so you know how to feel about that. Don't ask why these countries are in conflict. Don't ask why Russia invaded Ukraine. Don't ask who the Ukrainian government is. Is Zelensky really a hero, or is he a former comedian who was the Ukrainian-like version of who's on Saturday Night Live right now? Literally like some Saturday Night Live guy who was relatively popular with the public, and then the CIA overthrew the fucking country of Ukraine for like the third or fourth time in 30 years and installed Zelensky back in 2014. And And don't ask about why all his friends are his former comedy and TV producer friends. Don't ask anything about that. Don't ask why that we're so interested in spending so much money on the Ukraine without, there was nobody ever voted and asked me, hey, would you like to, for the duration of this conflict, spend more money on Ukraine than we already spend on Israel, which is an insane amount of money per year. It's over $40 billion per year, and that's just in the white budget. Don't ask about the black budget. Don't ask any questions about why we're involved in that. Just know that the Ukrainians are sweet and innocent puppies, and Putin's people who stomp on puppies. Not to say that Putin's a good guy or anything, but don't ask about why this is happening. Don't ask about, hey, before the wall fell and the Cold War was supposedly over, how many countries were in NATO? And then why is more than 3 times that many countries in NATO right now? I thought Russia wasn't a problem anymore. Or even if they were, it was more of like an economic problem. And didn't Barack Obama tell Mitt Romney that worrying about Russia is like a worldview that's 20 years out of date back in 2008 or 30 years out of date? Like, wait a minute. That doesn't make any sense. That's congruent. Don't ask these questions. Do not ask. Now, I know I started this video talking about libertarianism, but the reason why ultimately that libertarianism doesn't work is because just the free market, as regulated and restricted as it is now, has set up extreme monopolies. But a lot of people say the government facilitated a lot of these monopolies by unfairly advantaging in forming business relationships with certain companies to the exclusion of others. That is true. However, what part of removing any regulation or any rules whatsoever from the process that you think would produce the opposite result and not accelerate the same result? Please tell me in the comments why you think that the media wouldn't be just a bunch of liars who suit their own purposes or the purposes of the people who pay their bills. Don't explain to me why businesses that had no oversight wouldn't collude instead of compete. And you would say, well, there are always somebody who could financially gain a foothold and in fact gain power and strip public, public interest away from those unfairly colluding people. But the thing is, at what point do you think somebody could stick it out before some protection racket comes after them or some hired goons right out of a fucking Wild West oil barons, Rough Riders? What makes you think they wouldn't get bought out before they would get to any level of legitimate competition, as in they're a threat to their competition? These things don't work. Ultimately, I don't have a better solution other than civilization getting to a non-aggressive point. The non-aggressive principle is not really possible, because the only way to prevent this kind of thing is, unfortunately, with violent force. And if you can't depend on a government or any kind of oversight entity or a contractual court from the anarcho-capitalist to show up with a bunch of bailiffs or something to do something about this, then who's going to prevent it but somebody who literally goes in there and goes to literal war with those people? Like, what can actually reintroduce competition except for violent force? And the answer is nothing. To my knowledge, there's literally nothing that can prevent the level of corruption you see in society today. The level of corruption that you see in society today is almost unavoidable, and was only ever avoided in the past by violent force. And if you think we should be in some kind of post-violent society, it depends on what you think violence is. Because a lot of people would think that the level of corruption they're seeing is a violent threat to themselves and their livelihoods and their persons, and in some cases it actually is. Because in my opinion, I don't know about you guys, but slandering a person to the point where, in forming a society that allows this, where you can slander a person to the point where they not only can't work, but they can't have a bank account and they can't make transactional interactions with people, a la China, where you can literally be barred from buying and selling things, or even barred from travel by your social credit score. The only way to prevent this kind of things is with violent force. And that's what's disturbing to people. We're so disturbed by, and rightly so, the idea of violent force that even just saying, not advocating in any way, not saying that this is what I want or what I think should happen, but just that the only way I can think of to stop a specific form of totalitarian monopolistic corruption and terror and tyranny is the word I'm looking for. The only way to stop that kind of tyranny is by watering the tree of liberty. Nobody wants to hear that. And in fact, that's scary. And it should be scary. But is the alternative less scary? The idea that two companies own everything and one frame of thought has complete control over all information. And what if that frame of thought is hostile to you? What if I could prove to you that the frame of thought that owns everything is directly, violently hostile to you? Well, is that a conspiracy theory? Is just because I'm saying there's an imminent and ominous threat that is overhanging everything and is going to destroy society as you know it, whether you like it or not. If I tell you that, in the interest of helping you prepare to deal with the inevitable conclusion of this society, and believe me, we're in the late game of this society, late stage capitalism, the commies call it, but honestly, they're not wrong. We are in late stage capitalism, only the commies that you're dealing with, the libtards, the far left progressives, the extreme socialists and all that shit, the social Marxists and all that, they are a symptom of terminal late stage capitalism. The reason why they exist is due to the collusion, control, the nepotism, and the outright complete lack of competition in ideas or in money or in power that exists. The reason why that they've infected every level of society is because that is the totality of their influence and control. So when I say we are in late stage capitalism, that's literally what we're in. And that's why a lot of the really interesting conservative and sometimes far-right extremist people that you encounter throughout society, you'd think far-right means more capitalist and the better, and the furthest right you can be is anarcho-capitalism. But that's not true, is it? What we have is a world where the furthest right people still went, the only way out of this is authoritarianism. And the furthest left people looked at their situation and went, the only way out of this is authoritarianism. And the difference between them was only what they thought the best thing to replace what they were solving with would be. Now, we have not seen what fascists intended, be they of the Italian variety or the Central European variety or the German variety, and they're all very different because a lot of their shit wasn't tailored to my jerk-off dictionary definition of socialism or whatever the fuck, but their platforms were usually a direct response to the state their society was in. The Bolsheviks were a response to czarist oppression. Was it the right response? Of course not. But was it a response to the czarist system? Yes. Was Nazism a response to the control and rape of Germany by all the winners of World War I, producing Weimar Germany, which was not just an economically depressed hellhole because of the reparations demanded for the war that the treaty of I forget if it was the Treaty of Versailles or whatever, but it was the major treaty of World War I, and produced that society. And then within that society also became extreme social degeneracy and extremely insane kinds of thought. Particularly communism was super popular in Germany at the time, and violent communism and racial justice people running around rioting in the streets and burning shit down and causing billions of dollars in damages and killing and maiming innocent people and going on looting sprees. And sounds familiar, doesn't it? Sounds very familiar. You live in Weimar America. You absolutely fucking do. And how did Germany respond to that? With Nazism. Was that the right response? Probably not. But was it a response to an absolutely untenable situation? Yes. Was Weimar Germany absolutely completely unstable and going to collapse into some kind of fucking hellscape or another? and was in active collapse before the Nazi Party was even a thing, and was actively embroiled in violence and racism and chaos and degeneracy and all that. Was it really bad, after the Nazis got there? Arguably, yes. Was it really bad before the Nazis were a thing? Absolutely, yes. Oh, there's a fucking moth in my fucking goddamn house. Great, you're gonna make me all look like a disgusting, like there's bugs in my house because I live in Florida and they're unavoidable. But anyway, 25 minutes is long enough, and I got on a couple of diatribes. But the thing is, my point really isn't so much that libertarianism is bad, because libertarianism is not bad, it's unworkable. If I could live in a society where fair competition was a thing, and where we lived in a society that wasn't so devolved into corruption that you could just elect somebody that says, I'm a libertarian and we're going to do the libertarian thing for as long as I'm in office, just vote for me and it'll be so. Or even abolish the government entirely and expect the idiot talking monkeys of the human race to somehow make something better out of chaos than out of a nation. Well, at the community to small town level, as we had done throughout millennia, yes, you can actually have an anarcho-capitalist system that works just fine. Can you do it at a national level in the age of nations, where you kind of need to have a nation to stop from being preyed upon by other nations? No, you cannot. You cannot have a manifest destiny of anarcho-capitalism from the West Coast to the East Coast of the United States. It's impossible. It's as impossible as global communism is impossible. Now, do I think that the anarcho-capitalist society is a bad pipe dream? No, it's a very nice pipe dream, but it's a pipe dream. You understand me? It can't work. And America was honestly formed under some very, very, very far libertarian ideas, far more libertarian than any mainstream libertarian party, official libertarian party that you see running around. Especially the ones in America that are made by liberal capitulators that have names a lot like Jonathan Greenblatt or whatever the fuck that guy's name was, or Alan Greenspan. They often, for some reason, always have these really very names like that. Any of the chairmen of these organizations. I wonder why. Could it be because libertarianism as it exists as an official political party is controlled opposition? I'd argue so, but that's a topic for another video. 30 minutes is way more than enough on the subject, and I thought I might try to do this in 15 minutes, but the more I was discussing why these things are bad, I had to spiral back and forth between historical examples and how those historical examples are mirror images of our modern day example of how these ideas don't work. And the reason why they don't work is not because they're bad ideas, it's because they are entirely vulnerable to the corruption that's already destroying society. Okay? It's not an answer. It's just a nice thing we all wish we could have. But, if wishes were horses, beggars would ride. And hey, I wish I could fly, but if I jump off a building, I'm not going to get a positive result. You understand? So, thanks for watching.